Welcome, everybody. This is a session of the Union for Radical Political Economics at this ASSA annual conference 2022 on cryptocurrencies, political economy, and economic policies. My name is Julio Watto from St. Francis College in Brooklyn. I am the chair. Olivia Bulio Matos, also from St. Francis College, Brooklyn, is going to help me chair the session. The papers that will be presented are a contribution to the radical critique of cryptocurrencies by myself, the political economy of Bitcoin by Edmilson Paraná from the Federal University of Ceará, digital payment systems, recent experiences and future challenges by Simón de Deus from the State University of Campinas, and also Lais Araujo e Silva from State University of Campinas. Central Bank Digital Currencies and Implications for Monetary Policy by Olivia Bulio Matos from St. Francis College, and Fernanda Ultramare from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte, Brazil, and Ana Rosa Ribeiro de Mendonça from University of Campinas. Let's start. The order in which the session lists the presenters is I'm the first one in the list, so I guess I should start. So you can start typing me. Share my screen. Sorry, let me start over the sharing. My name is Julio Watto, as I said. And my intervention is titled "Toward a Radical Critique of Cryptocurrencies." Since Satoshi Nakamoto published his paper on Bitcoin in 2008, and then rolled out the software, mined the first block, and spent its first coin in January 2009, Bitcoin and a host of copycat cryptocurrencies, or cryptos for short, entered the economic scene. Their prominence has grown rapidly, although swinging widely from spectacular heights to depressing valleys. Nakamoto defined Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system on which people could exchange value secured by cryptography without intermediation by some central bank or institution that requires public trust. In spite of the bidding that cryptos have been taken lately in the markets, they will continue to proliferate. Just a few days ago, the Fed published its minutes announcing their decision to go more hawkish against creeping inflation. Some observers are already declaring cryptos dead. In any case, there is an intense debate in the academic and public arenas about the character of cryptos, their economic and legal viability, and even their moral legitimacy. Much has been said about their environmental, economic, and overall social impact. Mine is a modest contribution to this debate. I approach the phenomenon from my personal standpoint, that because of my background that has been very much informed by my reading of Karl Marx's major works. These notes owe very much to Marx and a host of other thinkers influenced by him. The terminology that I use, which I will try to define as clearly as I can, is to a large extent the terminology used by Marx and followers. However, I do not claim that mine is the correct Marxist interpretation of the crypto phenomenon. Whether or not my views are consistent with a more or less literal or loose interpretation of Marx's text is a discussion in which I have very little interest. The main questions that I would like to address in this presentation are two. Number one, what is the essential social character of cryptos, mainly Bitcoin, which is the dominant crypto? And question two, what is the place and function of cryptos in late capitalist society? Some of my claims may appear rather obvious to this audience, but I will state them anyway, not only for the sake of completion, but also because a few of them would be questioned by people that I respect. So I claim that cryptos are physical objects, therefore they are subject to the constraints of the physical world. The Wikipedia entry and a number of works on Bitcoin and other cryptos describe them as purely digital, dematerialized, intangible, etc. This is all nonsense. All products are human ideas embodied in some physical objects. They have to be embodied in physical objects, otherwise they would have no consequence in the physical world that we humans live in. So they are embodied in physical objects, including human bodies. So cryptos are no exception. Number two, cryptos are products of human labor. That's kind of obvious. They are also use values or useful products in Marxist terminology. Therefore, they are elements of individual and collective wealth. Now, by saying that they are use values, I'm saying that they satisfy or they meet social needs. The needs of a society are obviously shaped up by the dominant social structures that constitute such society. In other words, the composition of the needs is shaped by the distribution of wealth ownership. So I am not claiming that cryptos are good for humanity under all possible conditions. I'm only claiming that cryptos meet needs in this society that we live in. Also, cryptos are exchange values, and therefore they are values. Their market prices or exchange rates express the quantity of social labor time required to reproduce them. Consequently, cryptos are commodities in Marx's sense of the category, unities of use value and exchange value. On top of there being commodities, I claim that cryptos are also measures of value, means of circulation, or purchase or exchange. These are different terms that are pretty much equivalent. Therefore, cryptos are currencies. They are also means of debt liquidation, repayment, settlement, and also they are vehicles for saving or for people to park their wealth ownership over time, stores of value. All of this is to say that cryptos are forms of money, and since they move across borders, they also function as global or world monetary forms to some degree. Now, notice that I am not claiming that they perform these roles in an efficient or effective manner superior to alternatives. I'm just claiming that they effectively perform these functions. Now, as commodities and as monetary forms, as monies in a global context, characterized by gaping social inequality, so much so that a massive global labor market exists in which relatively and absolutely impoverished people offer their labor power for hire to a small minority of owners of large concentrations of wealth. In this context, cryptos are also forms of capital. They are vehicles of capitalist exploitation, and they are therefore means to expropriating the labor of the mass of direct producers. So as commodity, money, and capital forms, the existence of cryptos as social objects contributes to the massive waste of productive forces that characterizes our society. They also intensify class conflict and competition and the turbulence of capitalist reproduction. And also they contribute to the opaqueness, the mystification, the fragmentation of the social fabric of our society. With the time that I have allotted, I cannot fully justify each of my claims, so I hope that the audience will forgive my excessively categorical or perhaps dogmatic tone. What I will do next is focus on clarifying perhaps the most controversial claim I make, which is that cryptos are monetary forms in their own right. Now, how viable they are in the long run, given the existing cutthroat, competitive, and legal political environment in which they exist, that is a different question. To answer that question, we would have to conduct a specific empirical factual investigation, and that's not what I'm doing today. So I am also warning the audience again that I'm sticking to the categorization of the terms commodity and money introduced by Marx and developed by his followers. So this slide presents a few indicators of the economic prominence of Bitcoin, which is today the mother of all cryptos. Figure A shows the very regular money supply that Satoshi programmed in the Bitcoin code. As it is well known, the maximum supply of BTC is going to be 21 million units. It's estimated that that max will be hit by 2040. Figure B shows the price in US dollars, or the exchange rate, if you prefer, of BTC in a log scale. So the slope gives you an idea of the growth rate. Figure C shows the market cap in dollars. Figure D displays the evolution of trade volumes also in dollars. These bullet points are a bit dated now. They are based on a survey conducted by a team of academics from Cambridge University, headed by Heilman and Rocks. This was published in 2017, but let me just quickly skip over these slides so that I can focus on my main claim. So to the extent that cryptos enter the markets and demonstrate to be exchangeable values and therefore establish relations of comparison with other commodities and with one another, just like any other commodity, cryptos play the role of equivalence in Marxist sense, in the sense that they offer their use values or their physical bodies as standards against which to measure the value of other commodities. To this extent, cryptos, like all commodities, act as measures of value. This is what Marx deemed to be the chief role of money. In this sense, the mere fact that cryptos are exchangeable values qualify them as embryonic monies. All that is required for a commodity to perform this role of measure of value is that they themselves be values, that they themselves be products of society's labor, and cryptos qualify. Cryptos are no exception to this. So, of course, just like not every Catholic person can get to be the Pope of Rome, not all commodities raise to the level of general or universal equivalence. So raising to the level of general equivalent or becoming the dominant measure of value for other commodities is a matter of degree. Insofar as commodities become regularly exchanged and perform other monetary functions also regularly, they get to establish themselves. They kind of climb up the pecking order and become viable candidates for the role of universal economies or money proper. Also, insofar as they are used as means to acquire other commodities, cryptos, however irregular and difficult their performances in this role may be, cryptos indeed act as means of purchase or exchange or circulation. Also, insofar as they are used as saving devices or ways for people to park their wealth ownership over time, regardless of how stable their value may be over time, cryptos function as stores of value. Marxists do not consider the distinction between speculation and regular saving / investment as something crucial. It's something relatively arbitrary. So that's why this distinction is not as material as it is in conventional economic theory. Also, insofar as cryptos are being used internationally, they perform the role of global monies. In their function as measures of value, the equivalent role of cryptos is purely notional or imaginary, because as Marx says, to be measure of value, a commodity doesn't need to be to appear in person to tell another commodity its value. all is required is their value as a notional concept in the background. Now, in their function of means of circulation, that means as currencies, cryptos are only required, are not required also to be in person. They can use surrogates or proxies or symbols or tokens. Now, the needs for the means of circulation on the process of capital reproduction is regulated by the overall conditions of such cycle. This is in contrast, for example, with the monetarist story that places the money supply kind of at the center of the evolution of prices. Hoarding is the mechanism that adjusts and allows for the currency supply at each point in time to match the needs of reproduction. This mechanism has to be obviously modified as credit separates commodity purchases from their payments. And the replacement by a symbol, the replacement of an underlying money by its symbol, raises the possibility of a quantitative, not qualitative, but quantitative discrepancy between the symbol of exchange value and the value of the underlying money. For example, between currency, a paper money issued by, say, a central bank, backed up officially by gold, and the value of the underlying gold reserves. So this potential quantitative discrepancy highlights the fact that convertibility at an official preset parity is not essential for the symbol and for the underlying to operate as complementary monies. So their function is complementary. The legal convertibility of the symbol into the underlying as per an official parity is not essential for the effective economic relation of money. Legal inconvertibility turns a currency into fiat currency. But again, this is a matter of degree. It's not of the essence in the economic relation of money. So if it remains in circulation, fiat currency is effectively being backed up by some underlying money, by some commodity, regardless of appearance. So it may seem that they are detached, but they are not completely detached. Now, functioning fiat currency can be converted into the underlying or into any other commodity to the extent that fiat currency is functioning, right? That means that it doesn't completely evaporate. How? Well, via market exchange. Just like, for example, the US dollar, which is a fiat currency, right, can be converted into gold, right? Not an unofficial parity, but in the market, or can be converted into any other asset. But more importantly, if the currency is to remain viable, the issuer must voluntarily hold sufficient underlying reserve to sustain the fiat's exchange value, however diminished. Olivia, I don't know if you are texting me or saying something in the chat, because I cannot read the chat. So you will have to jump in and intervene to tell me that I ran out of time. Okay.
Yeah, I wrote in the chat that you had 15 minutes had passed 2 minutes ago. So
2 minutes ago. So I'll wrap it up. I'll wrap it up.
All right. All right. Thank you.
So thinking otherwise evinces magical thinking. Like it's a fetishism of state power in the case of central bank issue fiat currency, or a fetishism of wealth ownership in the case of private issue fiat currency. So state power, political power, or economic power, wealth of private owners are always finite, right? These powers are finite. Political power and private wealth are form of existence of the productive force of society's labor. Physical and value conservation laws apply to them, and underlying money, the commodity, need not be physically homogeneous. This is, I think, where probably the confusion lies, in expecting that, for example, gold be the underlying. The underlying doesn't have to be a uniform, physically uniform asset. It can be a composite of heterogeneous physical objects, like, for example, those that underlie the asset side of the balance sheets of central banks or state treasuries. In brief, to the extent that they perform monetary roles, which they do to some extent, as I've shown in those graphs above, cryptos are fiat currencies issued by private decentralized networks. How well and for how long I'm not non-committal about that. Thank you very much. Olivia, you wanna?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Julio, for staying in the time in under 20 minutes. So now we're going to have Edemilson Paraná presenting his paper. I don't remember if Julio mentioned in the beginning, but we're going to have all 4 papers, and then we're going to have discussions with panelists and the audience at the end. So Paraná, you have the floor.
Okay, hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm sorry for because I have some trouble with my technical trouble here, so I'm really sorry if I've been a little bit late. And Julio was me saying stuff in the chat because I misunderstood and entered the chat with Olivia nickname, but it was not, it was me. We will have time to discuss further in the Q&A session, right? So sorry for that. So here it goes. Well, I try to maintain my statements on a very straightforward and narrow argument, which I thought would be with no dispute, but maybe not, considering Julio's presentation. So here it follows. Many could be said, and in fact has been said about Bitcoin in a variety of aspects. Though considering the limits of this talk, I decided to focus on the macrostructural level of analysis in what I maybe can be defined as a political economy of Bitcoin, so to speak. But broadly, I would lose my time here mainly to say that Bitcoin is not and cannot be money in the proper meaning, the proper sense of the term. On these grounds, based on the theoretical understanding of money as a social relation, and here I'm talking about a definition of money from Marx, but not only can be somehow intertwined with other definitions of money that follow this statement of money as a social relation, but one can certainly be grounded on Marx on that also. I will defend, based on this theoretical understanding of money as social relation, that unfortunately I cannot, develop here because of my time limit. I will defend the narrow and straightforward argument that Bitcoin is unable to establish itself as an alternative to the current monetary system, as it does not meet elementary requirements of money, despised by the neoliberal ideology that sustains it. That is, despite its declared search for a substitution of world money for monetary stability against the supposedly inflationary state money and the depoliticization, decentralization, and deconcentration of monetary power, what is empirically observed is precisely the opposite. Low volume and range of circulation, great instability against the state money, transactional inefficiency, and greater relative concentration of political and economic power among its users. This non-fulfillment of radical neoliberal aspirations of Bitcoin, I sustain, shows that the attempt by its creators and enthusiasts of emptying money of its social content, that is, to neutralize it in capitalism, is just not feasible. That said, Bitcoin as a problem, as we know, offers a new and interesting opportunity to return to the fundamental debates about the complex nature of money within our societies. And that's why I think this reflection, although somehow very basic, I think it's still necessary for us here. So here goes why Bitcoin is not and cannot be money. One, and I will structure my argument based on the functions of money. Why Bitcoin cannot properly fulfill to perform adequately the functions of money. One possible and very straightforward way to visualize why Bitcoin is not and cannot be money is to address its capacity to properly perform the basic functions that regular universal money do. To begin with, it's not difficult to accept that Bitcoin could eventually serve as means of exchange, albeit in a limited form. Ultimately, some products and services can be, and in fact, are being exchanged by Bitcoins, as Julio presented also. We know that in the virtual environment, that anything can serve as a means of exchange in circles with relatively limited reach. Means of exchange of this nature are to be found everywhere and in increasing number of forms. Let's think about, for example, these airplanes, schemes, and so on and so forth. None of these alternative currencies or comparative currencies, alternative currencies, and so on and so forth. None of these alternative currencies, however, represent much of a threat to the national state management of sovereign money. It so happens that Bitcoin's defenders frequently confuse money with a means of exchange. Whilst this is just one of its many other functions. On the other hand, the fact that Bitcoin serves or has the ability to serve as a unit of account, on the other hand, or measurement of value, if you want to use this terminology, is something that can certainly be questioned. The number of markets that quote their prices exclusively in Bitcoin is extremely small. Even in obscure deep web markets, the commodities sold in Bitcoin are always quoted in relation to their price in national currency, especially the world's benchmark currency, the US dollar. In other words, despite the prices of these products being nominally quoted in Bitcoins, they actually vary not only in relation to the shifts in the price of Bitcoin, but above all, in the price of the commodity itself in dollars, demonstrating once again its need for convertibility and reproduction of money as a general equivalent. And here's a very important definition of money in Marx's theoretical account. Money is overall the general equivalent, not mainly a commodity, although it could be in the past be in a certain sense a form of commodity. Here, certainly Bitcoin's lack of legal recognition as a monetary instrument by the state decreases the eventual possibility of it actually fulfilling this function, unity of account. The other function, the store of value function or means of hoarding, is one of the most interesting of the obstacles facing Bitcoin. Above all, because it is the locus of materialization of a very strict way of understanding money that is clearly expressing the structure and the use of the software itself. In spite of its enthusiasts placing in this attribute great expectations for the success of Bitcoin as a form of money, it is clear that its great instability prevents it from objectively fulfilling this monetary function. Thus, it is that the defense of Bitcoin as a viable store of value once again revealing its pure ideological content. This concerns an aspect that relates to a direct analogy between money and gold. We know that Bitcoin was planned to stand in direct opposition to the so-called monopoly that central banks and commercial banks have on the issuance of money, and moreover, to run in parallel with a libertarian political agenda against the ability. You are asking about something. I'm not presenting slides and any sort of that. Just talk. Okay. It was about that, I guess, right? Okay. So here I go. So I was saying that it was made to run in parallel with a libertarian political agenda against the ability of states to collect taxes and monitor the financial transactions of their citizens. Those who have been developing Bitcoin believe that this can avoid wealth, allegedly hoarded by hardworking and frugal individuals, of being eroded by these parasitic actions of the state that by continually issuing more and more money to finance increased spending, lead society to endemic inflation, an indirect and an unjust form of tax, they argue, and therefore to a real dilapidation of this hoarded wealth. Based upon this logic, therefore, Bitcoin is presented as a real, solid, and stable store of value, as gold and supposedly would be, since the state cannot simply issue it. This is why a large proportion of its defenders are attracted to it, along the lines of the fetish for gold as a form of money, that is metallism, in that case, digital metallism. Initially, do you guys hear me and see me fine? Because I'm seeing something popping up in the chat. Maybe it's all good, right? Okay, so here you go. Initially, the manifest objective seems to be the search for a stable currency with a price that does not fluctuate uncontrollably, right? Because the main argument here is to to pose a form of money against the inflationary money of the state. So here you supposedly are trying to get some stability. But as the price of Bitcoin cannot be modulated, except by market transaction, this is simply not possible, leading to a high level of volatility, and by that to the dominance of the speculative function over its monetary functions. It is here, therefore, that we find a striking contradiction. Despite the developers and users defending its superior stability as a form of wealth, Bitcoin is revealed to be as being exactly the opposite. By the way, it is possible to say that the principal reason that this cryptocurrency has become so well known is precisely its high volatility. That opens up the possibility for huge gains in the short term. Despite this characteristic of being understood by its community of enthusiasts as a positive sign, since despite its sharp fluctuations, the price has been following a strong aggregate upward path, this instability has been a serious problem for Bitcoin. Our thoughts turned, for example, to the 1.3,000% valorization that occurred in 2017, and to the subsequent fall of more than 52% throughout the end of April 2018. Not to mention the recent 2021 unprecedented uprising. In that sense, related to the broad macro tendencies in the world economy, right? Liquidity environment mainly. In that sense, someone who stores their savings or profits in Bitcoin has very few reasons to expect the current prices to be maintained in the short term. In fact, quite the contrary, its mainly speculative use precludes its function as a means of hoarding, and as such, it loses the social recognition necessary for it to operate as a general equivalent. Furthermore, in some cases, especially where we see the frenzy that these hikes provoke, there appears the argument in defense of the viability of Bitcoin as a new form of money that could, moreover, substitute the others, making it hegemonic one day. What this speculative surge prove, however, is precisely the opposite. Given its great instability, Bitcoin is unable to properly execute any of the essential functions of money, since it does not meet any of the basic economic and possibly political and ideological prerequisites for its eventual dissemination. This is because the continuity of the exchanges and payments, of the hoarding, and also the production itself demands a certain general guarantee that the value will be maintained somehow. Let us imagine for a moment the remuneration of revenue, profits, salaries, all in Bitcoin. One of the fundamental tasks of money within the capitalist mode of production, being again the general equivalent. Given its great instability, this would be simply unworkable, entirely disrupting the economic activity. One of the main reasons that central banks exert the influence on money is precisely to guarantee that it continues to act as a relatively stable gauge of value. Or in other words, that it is reproduced as a general equivalent and abstract form of wealth. But the very existence of a central bank is inconceivable within the monetarist ideology of Bitcoin. And one might remember that Milton Friedman in the beginning of the 90s suggested that the central bank, the Federal Reserve needs to be replaced by a computer. The Bitcoiners are trying to do exactly this. The result of this is the lack of regulation and its incredible volatility that is so highly praised by the cyber libertarians. In fact, prevents the cyber libertarianism for being used in the way its defenders argue. The Bitcoin experiment does demonstrate the basic principle that the more free the markets are, the greater the tendency to produce drastic cycles of boom and burst. Without regulatory structures that discourage the use of an instrument such as investment hoarding, any financial instrument, including gold, would be subject to widely different forms of speculation, as well as the consequent extreme cycles of expansion and collapse, precisely what the actions of the central bank seeks to avoid. The truth, again, is that despite the arguments in its favor, generally concentrating on its characteristics as a potential form of money, the enthusiasm surrounding Bitcoin arises not from its use as a currency, but as a highly speculative form of investment, not to mention its significant use in illegal and criminal activities, tax evasion, so on and so forth. And the more attractive this cryptocurrency becomes as a financial investment, the less viable it becomes as a potential form of money. If Bitcoin were eventually to be regulated to the extent that it could be functioning as a stable store of value, and also guarantee that serious crashes or frauds as have occurred to be avoided, it could maybe in the future be used as a global payment system within the modes that already exist, as in the case of PayPal system and so many others. But this, of course, would not make money, would not make Bitcoin a general equivalent, nor would it be to undermine the global political and economic structures as it would wish to. I know I'm about to end my time, and so I'm finishing by now. Finally, as for its functions as eventual global money, we know that some observers and enthusiasts of Bitcoin have suggested that this cryptocurrency could one day come to challenge the global system that uses US dollar as its reserve currency, and upon which the economic power of Washington is largely based. There is no evidence whatsoever to support this claim. We know that maintaining the convertibility of the national currency into others implies a certain central management of the national currency, an activity that works to preserve it as a general equivalent. The economic power of states, therefore, underpins the monetary power of the general equivalent. Without the state in capitalist advanced economies and the material power that supports it, an obvious limitation of Bitcoin here, money cannot be reproduced as a general equivalent. We are also aware that the international circulation of commodities and currencies presuppose an international currency of circulation and reference, which relates to the values of the various national currencies, basically a global money. Currently, this money is, of course, as we know, the US dollar, which in a certain way, as a benchmark, reflects the power relations found in the international monetary financial system. Thus, it is that money is also seen as a point of international geopolitical tension and dispute. Due to the economic and political power that underpins it, the currency of the hegemonic state necessarily tends to perform a privileged role as the principal form of global money, precisely because it tends to be a solid store of value in that sense. And due to the fact that the foreign economic agents need for global money to be able to make their international payment investments, foreign central banks need to maintain reserve funds in this currency to ensure their ability to absorb any eventual shocks in the globalized capital markets and to deal with obstacles in the exchange market that could harm their position in international commerce. This hierarchy that exists in the interstate system is therefore enmeshed in the relations of global capitalist production. The tendency for the interests of capital in hegemonic regions to be intertwined with the interests of a hegemonic state in the interstate system and the compelling benefits of seigniorage to this hegemonic power imply that capitalism or money is a geopolitical weapon, not only a neutral instrument of trade. Considering that hegemonic states are not on the point of disappearing whatsoever, and that is absolutely unthinkable that a hegemonic capitalist state, whatever happens to it, would voluntarily forsake its enormous monetary exorbitant privileges, Bitcoin will never be capable of threatening the US dollar in its position as a world money. As we know, currencies are supported not only by the power of institutions, rituals, and forms of belief, but also by economic and political power of the countries, which certainly includes its military structures. All that said, I hope to make clear at this point why Bitcoin is not and cannot be money in the proper definition of the term, and by that, why it cannot establish itself as an alternative to the current monetary system. Thank you so much for your time and your patience. And maybe I think I was a little bit past of my time, so thanks for your patience on that.
Thank you, Paraná. Will you want to say something?
The next presenter is Simone. Oh,
It's actually Lais who is going to present.
Ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me share my screen. Awesome. So hi, everyone. My name is Laís. I'm from Brazil, calling from Campinas. We also have here Simone, who is my teacher and who also contributed a lot for this work in progress paper. So just a second. And this is our agenda for today. We are going to be discussing the emergence of Bitcoin and DLT systems, the central bank current experiences, mainly related to the Brazilian and European cases. And then we are going to talk about the challenges for central banks in the digital era. So, as you may know, the Bitcoin was created by Satoshi Nakamoto, a fake name for an unknown person, in 2008, being the first time issued in 2009, as Julio also mentioned. For some authors, such as Hidong, this crisis has reinforced the skepticism about the central bank's monopoly of the issue of currency and the monopoly of the banking system over the payment system. So we can understand that Bitcoin was created to challenge the paradigm of the state fiat currencies and also the role of the conventional financial institutions on the payment system. And in a technological perspective, Bitcoin was also capable to address past deficiencies in forming cryptocurrencies through the creation of a new payment system that we know as blockchain. But what is blockchain? And of course, it's not part of our purpose to go through the technical features of the blockchain, but it's important to have in mind that we have two main types to record and process a transaction. The first one is the centralized payment mechanism, in which the processing of a transaction is supported by a trusted third party. And the most widely known system for this case is the money market. And we also have the decentralized payment mechanism when the processing of a transaction is being made between the parties involved in a transaction, not requiring a central authority to do so. But the cryptocurrency invented by Satoshi Nakamoto is not only decentralized, but also supposedly fully distributed, because the mechanisms relies on the network of users to process a transaction on a shared ledger. And blockchain is the most, is the most popular example of that, since it can be downloaded by anyone who has a computer, and it's running on a decentralized peer-to-peer network, which means that every node of a computer terminal is connected to each other and will process and record the transaction. And now we have this context, we are ready to talk about more about this central bank current experiences. And because the emergence of cryptocurrencies and new payment systems, technologies such as blockchain led and inspired the central banks to develop more convenient and also more safer payment solutions. And the first case we are bringing here, considering this our context, is the Brazilian one, through the launch of an instant payment solution called PIX, which started its operations in November 2020. These systems enables the users to send or receive payments transfers in few seconds at any time, including on business days. But in this case, it's very important to have in mind that PIX does not use blockchain technology, as the system used is centralized in the Brazilian Central Bank Authority. So this is actually a big picture of this instant payment system. This is centralized in this infrastructure that we call instant payment system. And in this example, the payer who wants to transfer the funds for the payee needs to be connected with a direct participant or with an indirect participant or a payment service provider. And these last two, indirect participants and payment services providers, are the payments institutions not regulated by the Brazilian Central Bank that must necessarily to be connected with a direct participants, which are basically the bank institutions. And that direct participants holds specific accounts at the central bank scope. Here in the middle, you have the connectivity services providers, which are the companies providing connectivity services for the Brazilian Central Bank. And both settlement infrastructure and the liquidity provision are in the scope of the Brazilian Central Bank. And to end the Brazilian case, we brought some numbers and some statistics for PIX. So the number of natural person transaction PIX raised 7.7 times. The number of company users raised 7.2 times, and the volume of transactions in Brazilian reais made through PIX grew 21.5% times, sorry. And according to our Brazilian Banks Association, FEBRABAN, 71% of the Brazilians are users of PIX, and 76 approved the system during November 2020 and December 2021. Okay, so here we have the European experience, and the concept of the European integrated payment system is very similar to what we have in PIX in Brazil. On this year, 2022, the system will also accept transactions in Swedish currency. And one specific feature of the creation of the European integrated payment systems is that, different from the Brazilian case, in Europe, you had large numbers of local solutions for instant payments that was developed across Europe, and the European Central Bank needed to face it and ensure that this payment solution that we call like TIPS would not introduce national fragmentation in the European payments market. And to wrap up our discussion, we pointed out some challenges for central bank in this digital era, starting with this central question: are central banks designed a brand new economic ager? We know that we have some central banks developing and studying the potential issuance of central bank digital currency. For example, in the case of Brazil, last year, the Brazilian Central Bank announced the creation of a laboratory of financial and technology innovation, together with banks, institutions, fintechs, financial institutions to participate in the product preparation of the Brazilian real, offering solutions to make this currency possible. And the best projects will be selected, and the Brazilian Central Bank will begin to the execution of and the planning for what it's going to be on next steps. This is supposed to happen this year, and after this period, a schedule of pilots for tests with the population will be defined, and the result of this pilot phase will help to define the deadlines for the launch of this digital real. And in the case of the digital euro, the investigation phase started last year and will take 2 years. The central bank will look at how a digital euro could be designed and distributed to retailers and the public. as well as how the impact it would have in the market and the changes to the European legislation that might be needed in order to do so. And the decision on whether to develop the digital euro will be taken on the basis of this investigation phase that will take 2 years. In the case of China, for example, so far has done a number of trials around the country where users in certain cities have been given a small amount of this digital currency to be spent. And we had cases on some retailers, such as the e-commerce company JD.com have accepted it as payments in the last year. And we also have seen in the news that the central bank will offer a few yuan for tourists to test the currency in the Winter Olympics game, but we don't have yet not timeline for the officially launch of this currency. And based on that, some other discussions arise. Can digital currencies be used only by financial institutions? In the case of China, it seems not, but if the access is widespread, we would be limited or unrestricted or in unrestricted quantities. And will this currency be deposited on the central bank's accounts? Will they pay interest? And who will guarantee the privacy of people and companies regarding the way they use digital currencies? Or even if technology allows everyone to have their e-wallet in digital currency, would the bank lose their role as intermediaries? So there are some questions that arise, and so far there is no clear consensus on the part of the central banks on which path they're going to follow, but it certainly is something that is on the agenda of these institutions. So this is our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. The next presenter is Olivia or Fernanda or Anna, or the three of them.
Yeah. And I will present it and I will jump in. Anna, you're muted.
Microphone. Yeah. Anna, turn on your microphone.
And now you're muted again. And now, there you go. I'll keep my hands out of my computer. So good morning to everyone. I'm going to present a work in progress that my colleagues and me and I are making right now. And my colleagues are Olivia and Fernanda, but I also would like to say that part of the ideas that we are going to discuss here were raised by a group that we have a group formed just by women, and part of this group is represented here by Simone and Lais also, and Olivia, Fernanda, and there are also other girls that are part of this study group. It's really not a research group, but a study group. So many of the ideas that Lais has already presented are in our paper, in our working in process right now. So I'm Ana Rosa, and I'm going to do the presentation, and I hope that Olivia and Fernanda can join me in some moment. Okay. Is it okay to leave the presentation in that form so I can see you during the presentation? I do prefer doing that. So our outline is I'm going to make a brief introduction, then I'm going to discuss some motivations and issues around central bank digital currencies. After that, a conceptual framework very quickly, and then we are going to our points that are the effects of the adoption of a CBDC on credit. That's our point. So before doing that, I'd like also to highlight that when we made the proposal of this paper, we were thinking about the effects of the adoption of central bank digital currency on monetary policy. But as the research went on, we realized that we should discuss the credit, as credit also affects the monetary policy. So as we will see our presentation, we'll show a turn on our object of research. So what we are going to discuss on this paper is that the possible effects of the adoption of CBDC on banks' capacity to offer credit. What we see is that it's raised by the literature, but it's not raised on the way that on the background with which we work, as we will see. From our background, which is Keynesian and Minskian, and also we rely in a Brazilian post-Keynesian, very known called Fernando Cardim de Carvalho. In our view, banks are more than just intermediaries of funds. So we are not just talking about the intermediation of funds. We depart from the idea, the very strong idea, that banks that are financial institutions, but a specific type of financial institution, they are able to create money in the form of demand deposits, and when they provide credit. So when we are discussing money, private money, when we are discussing demand deposits, we are discussing credit. And we cannot look at the payment system without realizing the importance of banks on this system. So I'm going to be very fast on this because I think that Lais has shown very, very important ideas. But we believe, I can also highlight from now that we believe that the adoption of CBDC, depending on the design of this adoption, will change the way that the financial system works, as we know right now. And there's a large discussion of which should be the better design. And we see on literature the three big forms, and I'm going to highlight very, very quickly the first two. It could be direct and also hybrid. In both of them, the both forms, CBDC are a claim on central banks. Okay. In the case of directly, households and families and firms will be able to keep their resources, their digital money on central bank accounts. On the hybrid one, model or form, which may be the most used from the other system or form, what we see that the CBDC is claim on central banks, but there are a group of institutions that can handle also payments. They are authorized by the central bank, and they may keep in a specific reserve account the same amount of resources that they keep from people. Okay. So there are also other design issues, and Lais has detected them, highlighted them, how as the idea of anonymity and the quantity restrictions on personal holding, also the eligibility to hold of residents in different issuing jurisdictions, and we would say interest rates. That are some issues. And the literature raised these issues when we have in mind the idea that digital currency will substitute the paper currency. But as we see, it will not just substitute the currency, the paper currency. It will be also substitute the deposit papers, the deposit accounts. And so it will have effects on the on the banking system. We can also raise the literature that we have used, announce different motivations for the issue of CBDC, as efficiency in payments, as access, as also time, the idea of 24/7, also the idea of financial inclusion, and also the idea that we can facilitate the monetary policy implementation. But as we see, a very important motivation for the creation, this idea of creation of a CBDC by central banks, is the development of the cryptocurrencies. As we have seen on the discussion of our colleagues here, Paraná, and also Julio before us. And we see that it has to do with the idea that the central bank making an important effort to keep the system, the payment system, under control. So in some way, the development by different central banks, there are more than 80 central banks that are studying and trying to implement digital currencies, is in some way answers a response to this movement, to this private movement that we have seen. Here we detach the idea of FIAT that highlights the idea that an universally available, elastically supplied, and interest-bearing form of a CBDC would lead to financial destabilization, bank runs, a weaker supply of credit, and a privacy undermining, as Laís has already discussed. Our point here is to discuss the effect on credit. Again, our starting point, our conceptual framework is banks are more than just intermediaries of funds. In a monetary economy, the main liquidity creator is a specific type of financial institution, versus the banks. Banks are able to create money, and money supply is determined endogenously and created on the demand for credit. And also, there is a whole operated by these institutions, the bank, on the liquidity. If ultimate liquidity is created by central banks, by governments, banks are also able to issue an important substitute for government currency in the form of demand deposits. As I had already said, they are part of the payment system. And in the system as you work now, demand deposits or the money that the banks are able to create, they are convertible into currencies on demand at a fixed price, normally at par, even as private liability. So there is a movement, assurance of this movement between the private liquidity that's created by the banks and the ultimate liquidity that's the liquidity guaranteed created by governments. And so within wide limits, banks can create deposit liabilities, and it relies on the credibility of people on this system, okay? And on this movement, what we are highlighting here, we are highlighting that banks are important institutions on the creation of credit, and credit is quite important for the movement, for the function of the activities, of the economic activity. And then banks, on this movement of creating credit that's quite important for the function of the economy, they are able to create money. They are able to create demand deposits that are understood and plainly convertible into currency created by the central banks, the government. So on this movement, banks the financial system, that's an idea of Fernando Carlinhos Carvalho, reading the idea of finance funding proposal of Keynes, the idea that financial systems manage to process the liquidity allocation by creating deposits and being part of the payment system, where in this payment system, the deposits circulate, the demand deposits that are created by the bank circulate as the means of payment. And what we see, the idea that this central role, this important part that banks have on the movement of creation of money as they create credit, and credit is quite important for the economy. This central role can be changed if a very broad form of CBDC is adopted. That's our main point. And also, I think that I have already highlighted that banks are an important financial system as a whole, and banks are an important part of the liquidity transformation. They have on their balance sheets, they have an asset side that's quite shorter, and it's quite longer than their liability side. So they have an important role in creating and transforming the maturity of assets and liabilities in the system. And that's quite important for the firms and households, which are in the movement of economics. So we go here to our last point that we see on literature. So we are going here to try to highlight how we have seen the literature discuss the effects of the adoption of a CBDC by central banks on banks and on credit. But also we will show you that a lot of analysts, economists are thinking about it, but they depart from a different idea that we do. In general, they understand banks as they are able to manage the demand deposits, they are able to lend money, and so they are part of the system, but they are seen just as intermediaries. They take money from people and they lend money from people. Yeah. Here I have tried to detach. Banks, they decide to the decision of lending money depends on the desire of people to borrow money, and also in their search for profitability and their risk management. It's much more than they just look at their liability, their asset side, and we have funds for that, and then we are going to lend. They decide it's an ex-ante decision. They decide to lend, and in this process, they create money. And after that, they will look for a way to keep their balance sheet equilibrated. Okay, so the timing is quite different. And what we have seen in the vast majority of analysis that we have seen, they depart the idea that banks are all the time, that's a dynamic process, but they are all the time closer to their liability side when they decide to lend money. Okay, and so our exercise that is marked more by questions and issues than by response that we are going to show you here. Before presenting you the different views that we have seen, I'd like just to highlight something that I have already said, that currently physical currency issued by central bank runs parallel to private digital payments. Okay, that may change if a CBDC is adopted in a very broad manner. It's quite different to think about physical currency, the movement of physical currency, and the movement of a digital money. Okay. So as the system works now, we have a two-tier system. The government licensed private intermediaries as commercial banks to issue liabilities that are convertible at par into central bank liabilities. And then central bank runs a wholesale payment system for banks. And we have another tier that's marked by the relation between banks and households and firms. And in the vast majority, all the movements in the economy are taken through this system. This is the payment system that passes by banks. Okay, so that would be the second tier of the system. So first tier, central banks and banks, and the second tier, banks and households and firms, the non-financial institutions. And it may change as a CBDC is adopted. So now we are going to take, I think we have still 7 minutes, Olivia, I think.
No, 2 or
How
3.
many minutes? 3, sorry.
I think 2 or 3, right, Julio?
So what we have seen is that we have seen different authors here on the paper. At this moment, we highlight 5 or 5 or 6 authors that they understand the importance of the effects of the adoption of a CBDC on the intermediation process. But they are thinking about just the intermediation process. They are not looking at how it can affect this capability of banks to create demand deposits as they lend money. I'm not going to show you all the views. So we can just remember that if banks are very active in the process of money creation, if they do that by the low on supply, if they do that on demand for credit from households and firms that desire to borrow reserves, and then they also, what they have in mind, the search for profitability. In this sense, deposits and reserves are not restrictions on bank decisions of lending. They are an exposed issue. And as I have said, if there is the adoption of a money that's mainly a claim on central banks, it may change. And so we can raise, from that, we can raise some issues. And then we end our presentation. So what would the introduction of an universal central bank in the terms of CURRENCIES mean? Will there be a convertibility of demand deposits into CBDCs? If yes, at which price? Would it affect the capability of the banks, of the financial institutions in general, and banks to transform a private liquidity in ultimate liquidity? This ex-post movement will affect or would affect banks' decisions to lend. Would be able not to depend on demand deposits all the time, mainly in crisis time, as they lend the money that can be transformed from demand deposit into a CBDC, an account into the central bank. The resource will leave the banking system. And we were discussing that we believe that it may lead to smaller banks' balance sheets. It may lead to smaller interbank markets. And we understand that if banks, on this sense, will have a stronger reliance on central bank reserves. And also another issue that's quite important, that as you know, financial institutions are quite active. They innovate all the time, and they will respond. They will innovate. What would the financial innovation look like? Will this transform? Which time of transformation this will lead? But just to end, I'd like to highlight something that I have said at the beginning of the presentation. In our discussions, we have understood that we don't know in which way it will happen and in magnitude, but we understand that the adoption of a CBDC as a whole by different countries will mean that the financial system, especially the banking system, as part of the payment system, will be changed, will be transformed. The system, as we know in the last centuries, and especially in the last decades, will be quite different. And we are very worried about the effects of these transformations on the capability of the system to lend, to offer credit, to lend resources in order to keep the economy working as they should. So thank you for everyone. I don't know if my colleagues want to add something. Sorry if I took a little more time than it was expected.
Olivia?
I think we're out of time. We can start questions and discussions.
Sounds good. Can we keep the answers brief? Okay, let's see. There is here on the Q&A.
There is one
by an anonymous attendee. He says, it's for Edemilson and maybe Julio. Given that lives are lived digitally to a greater extent now than ever before, can we really defend the notion that Bitcoin does not have social meaning or value to it? And the second question, do you think cryptos can offer any kind of emancipatory potential in anti-capitalist struggle at all? And if so, under what conditions? And if not, why not? Is it only compatible with libertarian ideologies? These are very good questions. Go ahead, Edemilson.
Okay, I'll try to be brief, although these are not that easy questions to be brief. So, but I would like to start first. Thank you. Say thank you to you, Julio and Olivia, for organizing this panel. I came in a bit of a rush because I was Olivia. I thought you were in the organization also. But, so thank you most of all you, Olivia, for bringing us together here to discuss so important issues. Sorry for my initial problems, technical and problems and misunderstandings with the chat and so on and so forth. And once again, thanks for the opportunity of being here. To the anonymous attendee, I would say to not misunderstood me on that point, because I'm not saying that Bitcoin has not a social function, has not a social meaning or social value whatsoever. What I'm saying is that Bitcoin cannot be money in the full sense of the definition, right? It's very different from saying that Bitcoin does not has a social function, a use value, so to speak. I do think that Bitcoin has use values. I mentioned some of it in my presentation. It comes to stay, of course. It's been producing lots of interesting consequences in society, within not only in digital realms, but outside of it, in your social organization and so on and so forth. So Bitcoin is a very important kind of innovation, and that's why I guess we are trying to address in a serious, in a solid, in a rigorous way here. And my main point is, again, it's about the moneyness of Bitcoin. Because to say that Bitcoin is not and cannot be money does not imply that it's not important at all, and those have not a meaning at all. And of course, I think cryptocurrencies, well, how can I see that? if Bitcoin has a kind of emancipatory potential. Maybe, possibly so. It certainly opens interesting possibilities for fiscal monies, alternative financial schemes, for new agencies in terms of transparency, control, and so on and so forth, but not Bitcoin itself. Bitcoin as a sparkling, as a starting point for other innovations that are already happening and putting some pressure to interesting changes within financial systems. CBDC, for example, is in part, the way I see it, a consequence of the innovations brought out by crypto. And depending on its configurations, as we just saw, it can open very interesting opportunity for progressive policies on monetary and financial issues. Of course, it's not a matter of taking Bitcoin out in the trash. It's not that point, but to understand rigor in a rigorous way what it exactly is, so we can understand in what sense some of its features can or not be potentially emancipatory, progressive, or so on and so forth. But what I'm saying, and I wrote a full book on that, addressing the economic, political, ideological, and also other aspects of crypto and Bitcoin, is that the core political, ideological ideas, the main values that Bitcoin embodies are the libertarian, neoliberal, monetarist one, right? And this is not an unimportant thing. It's a very important thing to understand why NFT, why blockchain, why crypto, why Bitcoin are all enforcing the commodification, the privatization, and all processes that are presenting itself in this direction. Of course, it depends on the disputes, it depends on the conflicts, it depends on the way it's gonna, the new forms it's gonna assume. The way I see it, what is Bitcoin is, I will try to write up here too. What is happening is that blockchain, Bitcoin, somehow putting a technological pressure, a technological disruption in terms of banking and financial de-intermediation. That is the main point here, I guess. And it so happens that this is not only a pure technological question, of course, but as always a social, political, economic one. The new model that will, a financial system, as Anna Hauser just said, that will rise from this is still to be conformed and will be contingent on disputes undertaken in different, in particular contexts, histories, countries, and so on and so forth. And here lies the most interesting question for research on this area, I guess. Bitcoin, for example, the way you see it, it's not money. It can be, in a certain sense, a financial innovation, a kind of a speculative asset, and a digital commodity made for profit, right? That embody past that labor in terms of energy, mainly, but also equipment, warehouses, and so on. So have some value embodied, but not value added. What I'm saying by that, and here I talk to the framework of that Julio presented. The profits coming from exchanging mining of Bitcoin comes from the broad overall macro pool of value added of the economy, produced within other activities. So it's not producing new value. It represents only a transference of value in that sense. But Bitcoin, okay, it's a digital commodity, it's a financial innovation, it's a kind of speculative asset in this term, but it's not a financial asset, as some have saying, because in this sense, that is not, it not embodies a liability. Bitcoin is debtless. So it's a digital commodity in that sense with value, but no value added. It's not a financial asset, but it's a speculative asset like gold, like real estate, and so on. And it's not money at all in that sense. That's the way I see Bitcoin. Well, this opens lots of possibilities, not only for research, understanding, and possibly political experimentation with this kind of technologies. But it's necessary to have an open eye for this core ideological content that is mainly neoliberal, monetarist, as libertarian, as we know. And this has very important consequences, because it's the trend, it's the way forward that Bitcoin and crypto is taking. Look to NFTs. NFTs is a way of commodifying art, commodifying knowledge once more, to enclosure knowledge, information once more, as a tendency of late capitalist economies we see everywhere. So that would be my broad general comments on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Edmilson. Let me just say that I hope that we have enough space also to discuss Lais and Ana Rosa Olivia's presentations, because they are a topic that I may not have much to say, which is, the implications of introducing central bank issued digital currencies. But I will try to quickly address the question by Anonymous. In general, I do not, from my perspective, we do not judge, or we shouldn't judge a phenomenon by the way it presents itself, by the description that it provides itself. So regardless of how Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies have been presented to the public and the way they were rolled out and the way they exist now, I think that we have to take a bigger step back and kind of look at the big picture. Historically, just to say this in general, right? Historically, the monetary system, the global monetary system, has been composed by a lot of niches, or a lot of, there has been in modern times a dominant currency, like for example, the sterling pound or the US dollar in the 20th century, etc. But it's always been several competing monies playing in the monetary system. And even within a single national space, you had, for example, bimetallism in France, or in earlier times in England, and until the 20th century, you still have countries that use copper for small change transactions, silver for larger ones, and gold for even larger transactions, and paper money, etc. So different types of money can coexist and can compete and can also complement one another. Now, that said, there is also a tendency, and of course, the tendency is towards a single unit of account, is a single measure of value, the dominant one to prevail, etc. Because there are what economists call network effects, or externalities, or positive feedback loop dynamics. That means that the more people use a particular monetary unit, the more people will be inclined to use it, because it pays to jump in the bandwagon. So those tendencies obviously are asserting themselves in a very complex pattern. So my point of view is that I think we shouldn't shut down the window for cryptos. I think that there are some very strong reservations about their viability in the future. There are serious issues. I think Vitalik Buterin, for example, the creator of Ethereum, wrote a paper not long ago where he introduced a sort of trilemma, meaning that there are three competing priorities in a digital, a private decentralized digital currency. And they have to be with the scale of transactions that can manage, the security that it can provide, and I think I forgot the other one right now. But apparently it is not possible to make them all compatible. Like, you either have to expand the scale of operations, and if you do that, like for example, if you make the blockchain larger, then only a few very highly centralized nodes in the network are going to be capable of managing the ledger or the blockchain, which means that there is going to be a tendency towards concentration, and therefore, points of failure, etc., the things that are supposed to be avoided by the Nakamoto Bitcoin system. So there are all of these issues that haven't yet been resolved satisfactorily. So that means that, you know, that there is a possibility that cryptos may fail as you know, it may become unviable in the future. However, you know, circumstances change, political and economical conditions, and the international system, right? The brinkmanship, for example, between China, you know, the United States, the Eurozone, etc. All of those things, Russia, etc. All of those things can lead to a very unstable situation in the global economy, and that may create open window for some cryptocurrency. I think right now Bitcoin would be the largest candidate, you know, to be adopted more massively than currently is. So that's why I tend not to discard, you know, those possibilities outright. Now, in response to the second question, right, about the emancipatory potential of Bitcoin, I fully agree with Edmilson that as it is, as they exist, rather, Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies, it's very unlikely that they will serve a progressive or, you know, a revolutionary or a, you know, a social reform type of role in the near future. Blockchain technology, distributed spreadsheets, protected through some cryptographic system, they may have some application. Here's the thing. I think that there is what I call the hard problem of socialism, right? This is the hard problem of socialism. And that is that you know, as productivity develops, as, you know, productive wealth becomes more powerful and all that, like in particular, for example, in the case of monetary systems, right? The ideal would be to have a single digital currency that is global, right? And that is supplied, that is issued by, say, like a global central bank that is fully accountable, right, to all the citizens in the globe. That possibility is very remote right now, given political conditions, etc. So, but if that happened, if you had that kind of central bank at a global scale, you know, that concentrated power, how would it be accountable to people, to regular individuals in the street? You would have to have some system, some political mechanism, and the design of that political mechanism and making it compatible with the existence of centralized states and centralized institutions of the state, like central banks, is a very, very hard problem. It's a very, very hard problem. I think the history of socialism kind of shows that. I don't have a solution for that hard problem of socialism, but it is a tension that is kind of like inherent to the notion of socialism. However, you know, I still retain hope that it is possible to have a future society where individuals can actually exercise control and keep accountable their central agencies. You know, Marx believed in a future that would be stateless. In that sense, he shared that ultimate goal with anarchists, except that, of course, the approach or the strategy to arrive at that stateless society was completely different from the anarchist approach. But so just to leave it there.
I think Simone said that she wanted to
great.
make some remarks.
There is another question also open, but yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to add my 2 cents on this discussion also. I think listening to you, Julio, and Edmilson also, and the 2 views on money, I think that a basic question on this discussion is, what is money? So, the parts from this answer on what is money, I think many important parts of your conclusions. In my opinion, Julio is connected to a certain reading of money in Marx. And also Paraná is connected to a certain reading of money in Marx, but he brings also some anthropological views on money, and highlights the importance of state and power in money. That is something that I tend to agree with, and that I think that the post-Keynesian approach is moving to this agreement as well, to the special role of state and the power in this, in the definition of what is money. So in this sense, I could take an MMT approach and say that money is going to be that the state defines as money, because he is going to charge tribute in that thing, and he's going to collect also the taxes in this money that he defined it as. So in this sense, I don't see at the moment any cryptocurrency except for El Salvador, I think. Is El Salvador that is using an series? Yes. So they are trying to do that. I would like to research a bit more on this. I don't know nothing else than the highlights. But except for that tiny experience and limited experience, we don't have states accepting the so-called cryptocurrencies. That I agree with also with Paraná, that they are more like crypto assets than with cryptocurrencies. I don't see states accepting cryptocurrencies to settle the debts that the citizens and the corporations have with the state. So one thing that I think it's worth exploring is that the way in which cryptocurrencies led us to the central bank digital currencies. And I can see, maybe on a utopian way, I can see somehow that the CDBCs can allow us to design a different financial system. And the technology now enables us to design a different financial system in which the banking system is not going to have the monopoly over the payment system. So from the technological point of view, this is perfectly possible now. So I think that right now, in order to prepare their projects on moving to CDBCs, the main challenge of the central banks is a political decision regarding the way that they are going to design this new payment system, is the way that they are going to reorganize or not the way the system functions now. So I think from a political economy perspective, we have to have that in mind also. And it is very important that we can share with people in a broader sense what is happening right now in terms of this movement that the central banks are doing, because this can be a revolution, or this can only be an ordinary evolution that makes things more efficient and more digital, but don't change the structures of the financial system. That I think would be something that we would have to do. I think it's that. Thank you for the opportunity, Olivia.
Thank you, Simone, or Simone. Yeah, great point. I have to say just quickly that, yeah, I think if we have like a coffee conversation, Milson and I will agree, that we are simply framing things a little bit differently. He says, like, Bitcoin cannot be a full money, right? So I would agree with that kind of formulation. My point is that, money, as you ask at the beginning, what is money, right? So money is actually a structure, is a combination of several features or several roles or several functions. And actually, the same object does not have to play all of those roles at once. It could be like, even in a given society, you can have one role being played by one object and by a monetary instrument, and another role played by another one. So because it is kind of that kind of complicated Frankenstein, it's like, you know, you have different answers, like the complete or the full answer is more complex, right? But yeah, I agree. Now, if you define money as something that is issued by the state, then I think it's cheating, because you are basically by definition ruling out all kinds of private, private propositions. And I don't think, but that leads to a discussion about the history of money and all that. So but in present times, I will say, for example, El Salvador is a small country, it's a very small country and impoverished country, but it could actually, apparently, like I haven't followed the news, but it could accept Bitcoin in the payment of taxes, and, you know, may collect taxes in Bitcoin, etc. So that, you know, basically relinquishing, monetary policy to something very, very wild and volatile. I think that would be very stupid, but that's kind of a political judgment. It's not a theoretical proposition.
May I add something on that?
Yeah, go ahead. And also, like, if you can start addressing this other question that Emilson can, or anybody for that matter, can any cryptocurrency remain relevant if its scale cannot be controlled? I think yes, the answer is yes, but go ahead. Yeah, anybody.
Just to point out that I really do agree with someone in one very important point, that is, this is a mainly political question, because people tend to be a little bit, how can I say, overwhelmed about the technological disruptional aspect of this. But this is, as always, about when it's the case of technology, it's a political, social question. I know it's a very basic statement, a very modest one, but it's very important to state once again, because all the time this question is being pervaded by this technological celebrationism, fetishism, and so on and so forth. And here again, I guess we have to have some very straight disciplinary, methodological discipline concerning the understanding of this. And this brings us back to the theoretical question that Simone just presented us. And I think this is a very, maybe the most important question, as she just said, because for me, and here is stating our definitions of money, I know in some sense they can be combined, they're against each other, but it's important to clear the field, right? And for me, money is as a general equivalent, as the socially accepted form of representation of abstract wealth is a social relation of representation and realization of value. Mainly this, and this is very important to understand the role of money within a capitalist economy, and the different roles of money and different forms of money are mainly constrained by this definition. And when I say socially accepted, I include here state power, class struggle, and geopolitical relative differences and inequalities. All these are embodied in money. So money, it's a matter of economic, political, ideological aspects as a whole. And that's why it's so a complex, interesting, and challenging object to face, right? State, of course, is a centrally important here. I do share this understanding, but not only the only game in town, right? Because you have also the private, the classes, the interests, different interests concerning the control of the state, how the different results of monetary policy impact different social actors, and how they overreact on state control, and so on and so forth. It's not that easy. But the point is, and here I say that to you, Julio, is that all partial forms of money, or alleged and wanted forms of money, has to be reproduced in the end of the day, as the last instance, as a general equivalent. So it has to be convertible somehow. And this necessity of being convertible presents us with some call, as Susan just pointing for example, called monetary constraint, which is the necessity within capitalist economies of all forms, of partially forms of money to be reproduced in the end as the general equivalent. And when I say that Bitcoin cannot be money, I'm saying that Bitcoin cannot be this overall social relation represented by or embodied in the general equivalent, because it, again, led us to monetary constraint, and monetary constraint implies, to recall of Guattari and Orleans, of violence and confidence and power and so on and so forth. So it's always, again, and we can full circle the argument, a political, economic, ideological question when it turns out to understand about money. And that's, again, we can understand how CBDC question is so important and how this connects with this point, and why Bitcoin, blockchain, crypto, NFT, so on and so forth are part of the conversation in order to understand what CBDC can be in the future, because it's a matter of political decision, it's a matter of class conflicts, economic agent conflicts, and so on and so forth. The way it's going to be settled in different countries, regions of the world with different histories of their financial system depends on that. And that's why it's so important to properly understand it and to properly intervene to prevent this of being a free money and hell in order to be a so to speak post-Keynesian heterodox Marxist heaven, so to speak, more prone to heterodox heaven due to a free money and monetarist hell, because CBDC can also be that, Simone, right? Can also be this, depending on the way we set it. It's not only a technological question, it's a political one, as always it is, right? Well, I guess can any cryptocurrency remain relevant in its scale if its scale cannot be controlled? Well, Eddie, I think that the point I made answer to that, right? Because it's a matter of social relations, so its scale is fundamental, the state is fundamental, regulation is fundamental here, and that's why I think crypto, as I said, comes to stay, of course, has lots of social functions, including tax evasion, illegal activities. It's necessary somehow within capitalist economies, right? Corruption and so on and so forth, exchange of funds, even for good purposes like political exposed individuals fighting for good causes like Julian Assange and so on and so forth. They're using Bitcoin in order to protect from the state surveillance, and of course there is also this. But I think that cryptocurrency are to be remain as a crypto asset, mainly fulfilling the social function of crypto asset, to be exchanged like that, to make profit like that, to be speculated like that. That would be my remarks. Thanks.
Okay, Ana Rosa raised her hand, sorry.
So just very quickly, I'd like just to may highlight something that Denilson has just said, and also Simone, that the role to be played by CBDC depends on the design. And design is a question not of technology. The technology is there, but the political decisions are the important decisions. See, the technological issues, they are part of the process, but the political are the main issues, and it will organize the design, and depending on design, the effects will be different. You see, we were working with the idea of a very broad concept of CBDC, and then the effects can be a type of effect. But I totally agree. The design are the main issue. This issue is political and not technological. I just quite agree with that. And also, in part of the design, I think that just goes into something that Simone said about the regulation. See, that's what we are talking about. The design is part of the regulation of the system. So I totally agree with both of you.
Okay, Olivia?
Yeah, just to compliment Ana Rosa and Simone in Paraná, I think what we try to show in our paper presentation is that CBDC is of course connected to cryptocurrencies, because as far as our understanding, it is one of the first times that central banks are trying to get ahead of changes in the financial systems before things get out of hand. So it's their way to try to assert control in the system before it gets out of control. And of course, there are design issues, but it's, for us, it's not just a change in the format or how we use money, right? It's not just a change in the means of exchange, the means of payments itself, right? It's a profound change in the structure of the financial system. It has the potential to be abused, right? It's not just a digital currency. We're not just stopping using cash and start using like a debit card that is now issued by the central bank. No, it has the potential to profoundly change the structure of the financial system, and that for us is worrying, right? Because it may change the credit allocation, credit provision by banks. And if it's not done in the correct way, in the correct design way, it may lead to risks, right? And that's, I think, what our main message and how it connects to Bitcoin. Okay.
With respect to Eddie's question, I have a question to the question, but I don't think Eddie was able to answer it. I would like to know what he means by uncontrolled or not controlled, the scale not controlled. So if what Eddie means is that that there is not a binding maximum supply, then I think we can think of a private decentralized network, supplying a crypto without having a ceiling or a binding maximum. In that case, you would have what Keynes would call an elastic money supply, but a central bank issued fiat. But in this case, it would be private because it would be issued by a private decentralized network. Now, would that be viable? The network will have to enjoy a very high level of trust compared to alternatives, right, by its users. Otherwise, it wouldn't work, I think. There is another question open. Let me see. Oh, just seeing the response. Yes, that was okay. Satoshi. Yes, answered. Any thoughts that you had, you, the women in the panel, the majority, any thoughts that you had about each other's presentation? Let's use the few minutes that we have. Simone, you seem to be put her in the spot.
No, I can add something that is more focused on what Olivia and Ana Rosa were highlighting, and Fernanda in their paper presentation. That is the fact that nowadays we have the banking system chartered by the government, by the state, to issue money as well. And but that is not for granted. It has been this way for a long time, but it's not necessarily going to be this way forever. And in this disruptive moment that we are living, in this disruptive technology that we are living, there is the opportunity to change the status. But as the girls highlighted before me, nowadays, and for a long time has been like this, we have the banking system performing very important roles in the society, and also performing important roles and creating important impacts in the society. And now I am focusing on the bad impacts, like the instability and financial crisis that we had. So redesigning the system, taking in consideration this brand new technology can impact on all these roles performed nowadays by the banking system. And I was preparing this participation and also thinking that Minsky, he constructed a way of thinking in different ages in capitalism, and those different ages, they are introduced with a new financial structure. So every time the financial structure of capitalism changes, we have a different age in capitalism. So the managerial capitalism had a certain structure of the financial system, and the money market capitalism, or the financialized capitalism, had another feature characteristic of the financial system. Maybe we are about to enter to a new age, and for that to happen, I think it's pretty much important that we change the way our the financial structure of our system behaves. That's it.
Thank you, Simone. I think Ana Rosa Ribeiro is going to close the session. Thank you very much for attending. So, Ana Rosa.
Just very, very short comment. And I think that we can take that from this last comment made by Simone. We are not here defending the financial system or the banking system. As they work now, they could work more progressively in a very different way. You see, we are not defending this system, but this system has a role, and we believe we have written that in different moments. We believe that this system could work stronger, could have a broader role in the working of the economy. But as it works now, it has an important role, and we believe that it can be changed, and we don't know. For example, a very, very, very simple question: which will be the institutions that will grant money for household and firms in a different system? There are some analysts that defend that central bank can do that. That central bank can lend money to people. That's quite a different world. So the idea is this financial system has an important role. We don't know. We don't start saying that it works perfectly. That's very far from this. And it depends, and this working depends on regulation, but we think that it can be changed by, as Olivia said, we are not here talking about, we are going from current, from paper, from cash to digital. It's much more than that. We can have a different structure of the financial system. That's our point. Let's say, taking the idea of credit.
Thank you. I think the time has concluded. Thank you for all the people who attended and for the panelists. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Have a
Bye,
good day.
bye, bye. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.